The morning sunlight filtered through cherry blossom petals, casting soft rays into the living room. Laura sat in the rocking chair by the window, cradling her 3-month-old daughter Olivia and gently running her fingers over the baby's cheek. The red birthmark that covered the right side of her face appeared to Laura like a precious treasure. "What a lovely morning today, isn't it?" Michael's gentle voice drifted from the kitchen along with the aroma of coffee. Taking advantage of his day off, he wore his favorite navy polo shirt while making pancakes. Laura had been a pediatrician for 15 years, specializing in research on hereditary birthmarks. But at this moment, she wasn't looking at her daughter's sleeping face as a doctor, but as a mother. Olivia's soft breathing was as gentle and peaceful as the spring breeze. 2 years ago, at the opening ceremony of Connecticut General Hospital's new wing, her meeting with Michael, the architect who designed it, felt like destiny. She, passionate about research, and he, with his sensitive nature, clicked immediately. Then marriage. Along the way, she met her mother-in-law Helen, the former owner of a beauty salon chain, who embodied perfect grooming and refinement. "Let's build a perfect family," Helen had said at the wedding. Laura didn't yet understand the weight of those words. In Michael's childhood photos, there were always glimpses of strict upbringing. Perhaps Helen's obsession with perfection was her way of expressing love for her son. The morning sun grew stronger, making Olivia's birthmark more vivid. Laura smiled at this perfect imperfection. Yet she couldn't foresee the trials that lay ahead. Outside the window, cherry blossoms in full bloom swayed in the wind, petals dancing in the air. The scene was as beautiful and fleeting as the prologue to the story about to unfold. One early May afternoon, 2 weeks after Olivia's birth, the doorbell rang. When Laura opened the door, Helen stood there holding armfuls of luxury brand shopping bags. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, complemented by a modest pearl necklace. Her Gucci dress fit like a second skin, embodying her reputation in Greenwich's social circles as the epitome of perfect beauty. "Oh, Laura. These are from Mother. The baby clothes are Hermes, and the swaddling blankets are Burberry," she said while briefly wiping her feet on the doormat before clicking her heels across to the living room. The moment Helen saw sleeping Olivia, she faltered. "Oh my." Her voice held deep disturbance. Laura didn't miss the change in her mother-in-law's expression. Her trained medical eye caught the subtle shift. The white-gloved fingertips trembled slightly. "This birthmark." Helen furrowed her brow. "You can have it surgically removed right away, can't you? I know an excellent specialist on Park Avenue in New York. Have you heard of Dr. Daniel Watson? I can make an appointment." "Helen," Laura interrupted with a gentle but firm voice. "Olivia is only 2 weeks old. Surgery too early would increase the risks. A gradual approach that follows her growth. But her appearance. It'll show in photos, won't it? What about Christmas cards? And my bridge club's photo session is coming up. Everyone's looking forward to seeing pictures of my first grandchild." Just then, Michael came home and entered the living room. Dressed in his navy suit, he noticed the tension between his mother and wife, looking confused. He had just finished an important presentation at his architectural firm, but the heavy atmosphere in the room made him forget his fatigue. Over the next few weeks, Helen's visits became persistent. La Mer luxury skincare products, traditional medicine ordered from Paris, and even questionable clinic brochures. Each new solution she brought made Laura, as a physician, increasingly concerned. The early intervention therapy proposed by one clinic particularly worried her. Her researcher's conscience raised red flags about the treatment's lack of medical evidence. Helen's obsession with family photos on social media grew more serious. The mark won't show from this angle if we use this filter. Such phrases became like mantras. Her Instagram showcased perfectly staged, happy family photos. Behind the scenes, Olivia's right cheek was cleverly concealed. One day in her hospital research lab, Laura compared old photos of Michael and his father. Her medical intuition told her something. The characteristics of hereditary birthmarks and the gaps in Michael's family tree. She scrutinized the hereditary birthmark database, focusing on distinctive patterns. There seemed to be an untold truth hidden there. "Hey, Michael," Laura asked one night as they lay in bed. "Are there any other childhood photos of your father?" "Come to think of it." Michael put down his tablet and stared at the ceiling. "There are hardly any photos of Dad from when he was little. Mom didn't like them, said Dad was camera shy." As June arrived and roses bloomed in the garden, Helen's expression grew darker day by day. Especially when looking at Olivia's birthmark, her eyes held an unusual fixation. It was as if that red mark was reopening her own past wounds. Sometimes she would start to say something, then bite her lip and sigh deeply. Michael found himself caught between his wife and mother. As an architect who pursued perfection, he felt uncomfortable with demanding perfection in family life. His building designs always intentionally incorporated imperfections that added human warmth. He always said this was the soul of architecture. "Could you just ignore what Mother says?" Michael told Laura one day in his study. "Since I was little, Mother always insisted everything had to be perfect. She never liked talking about Father either." Those words hung heavy in the air, like an omen of things to come. Laura placed her hand on her husband's shoulder and nodded silently. But her medical intuition told her something deeper was lurking. She opened Olivia's treatment records and fell into quiet contemplation. Outside, early summer twilight had replaced spring cherry blossoms, and maple trees along the street swayed quietly. The breeze stirring the curtains felt like the calm before a storm. A strange cry broke the midnight silence. Laura awoke as the digital clock showed 2:15 a.m. Olivia's unusual crying triggered both her maternal and medical instincts. Michael was away on business. The light from her bedside phone cast a pale blue glow in the darkness. "Olivia." The 30-second walk from bedroom to nursery felt like an eternity. Moonlight leaked through the half-open door at the end of the hallway. And there was a faint smell of bleach. Laura's heart began to race. When she opened the nursery door, her blood ran cold. Helen's silhouette stood by the window in the moonlight. Dressed in a white nightgown, she looked like a ghost. One hand held a bottle of bleach, the other a wet cloth. Olivia's cries grew more intense, her small cheek unnaturally red. "What are you doing?" Laura's scream shattered the night's silence. "Oh, Laura," Helen turned around as if having a casual conversation. Her expression showed an eerily calm madness. "I was removing that mark for you. Now we can take perfect family photos." Laura crossed the room in an instant and lifted Olivia. Her pediatric training enabled clear thinking in this emergency. She quickly assessed the reddened skin and determined the need for first aid. Fortunately, there weren't yet serious chemical burns. "I'm calling an ambulance," Laura said, pulling out her shaking phone. "Helen, don't move." "But this is just like George." Helen's voice trembled. That birthmark appearing again. In that moment, something clicked in Laura's mind. George. This birthmark is hereditary, isn't it? Michael's real father, was that George? The color drained from Helen's face. In the nursery's moonlight, deep fatigue lines emerged beneath her perfect makeup. As ambulance sirens approached, Helen collapsed into a chair. 30 years ago. I fell in love with someone other than my husband. Her confession quietly filled the room, as if releasing a long-carried burden. George was an art teacher at Connecticut State University. My husband was always working, and my heart gradually grew cold. Helen's voice wavered as she recalled the past. George was different. Warm, artistic, but he had this birthmark. The paramedics arrived and began treating Olivia. While explaining the situation as a doctor, Laura listened to Helen's story. "When I found out I was pregnant, I had to choose. A perfect marriage with my husband, or scandal and ruin." Helen stared at her hands in the moonlight. They still smelled of bleach. "When Michael was born, I expected a perfect baby. But that birthmark." During the ambulance ride, an emergency call went to Michael. "I'll come right away," his voice clearly showed distress. In the hospital emergency room, while doctors treated Olivia, Laura finally connected all the dots. Why Michael's father wasn't in childhood photos. Helen's obsession with perfection. And the ghosts of the past that Olivia's birthmark had awakened. "I'm sorry," Helen confessed in the hospital hallway. "I just wanted to protect our perfect family, but the cost was too high." Before dawn, Michael arrived at the hospital. His expression mixed confusion, anger, and deep sadness. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" "Michael." Helen couldn't meet her son's eyes. "You were my perfect son. To protect that perfection." "Perfect." Michael's voice shook. "Was my life just a perfect cage built on lies?" As sunrise began streaming through the hospital windows, a new family reality emerged. Olivia's treatment was successful, with no serious after-effects expected. However, the night's events had brought irreversible changes. "Legal measures will be necessary," Laura quietly stated. "Reporting to Child Protective Services, and..." Michael nodded. As an architect, he understood the importance of structure. And now, the very structure of his life was shaking at its foundation. "I want to meet George," he finally said. "My real father." Outside, dawn was breaking. The new morning light was about to illuminate a different kind of family. Early morning light streamed into the hospital consultation room. Shadows on the ivory walls seemed to anticipate the changes about to unfold. Laura had removed her doctor's white coat and sat as a wife and now family healer. Please tell us whatever you feel comfortable sharing, she gently encouraged Helen. The empathetic listening skills she developed as a doctor came naturally. Helen unconsciously fidgeted with her pearl necklace, trying to control her trembling hands. Her perfectly styled hair had come undone, makeup beginning to fade. Yet strangely, she looked more human than ever before. It was spring 1985, Helen began, gazing out the window. James had just been promoted at his securities firm and worked late every day. I was lonely. Michael watched his mother's profile, listening silently. I started taking oil painting classes at Connecticut State University's public lectures. That's where I met George. He was such a gentle person, Helen's voice trembled. He had a large birthmark on his right cheek, but he didn't seem bothered by it, rather seemed proud. This is my uniqueness, he'd say. So the father in the photos wasn't James. Michael's voice carried deep sadness rather than anger. No. But when you were born. Helen sighed deeply. You had the same birthmark on your right cheek, and I became frightened. Our social standing, my husband's trust, everything would crumble. So, the plastic surgery, Michael touched his cheek. A faint surgical scar now held new meaning after 30 years. I'm sorry. Helen's voice cracked. I couldn't tell George either. He later moved to an art school in San Francisco. A knock on the consultation room door announced the Child Protective Services social worker. Carol Watson, a warm-faced woman in her late 50s. You've all had a difficult night, Carol quietly sat down. First, I have good news about Olivia's condition. The dermatologist confirms there won't be permanent damage. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. However, Carol's expression grew serious. We need to make some decisions about how to proceed. As legal procedures were explained, Michael's phone buzzed. A message from his New York architectural firm. An important project deadline loomed. But his mind was on a different blueprint. He needed to build new foundations for his life. We can find George Anderson, Laura said quietly. Using medical community networks. But before that, Carol interjected, we need to establish contact restrictions with Helen. I understand, Helen said in a trembling voice. I should keep my distance for a while. Michael's expression was complex. As an architect, he excelled at thinking about problems structurally. Mom, would you consider counseling? We might need family counseling too. Weeks passed and summer approached. The day came to meet Michael's birth father, George Anderson, at the San Francisco Art Institute, bridging a 30-year gap. So you're... Michael, George's voice brimmed with emotion. The large birthmark on his right cheek looked like a future version of Olivia's small mark. I couldn't believe it when Helen contacted me. Their conversation expanded to art and architecture, genetics and destiny, and the meaning of family. George's works embodied a philosophy celebrating the beauty in imperfection. It resonated remarkably with Michael's architectural philosophy. There's no such thing as a perfect blueprint, Michael realized during their conversation. Both architecture and life gain true strength by embracing unexpected changes and improvised beauty. On the flight home, Michael messaged Laura, let's draw a new family blueprint together. Meanwhile, at home in Connecticut, Laura stood by the window holding Olivia. The birthmark on her small cheek glowed softly in the sunlight. As a doctor, mother, and family member, she smiled. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered to her daughter. "You're beautiful just as you are." Legal proceedings progressed, and Helen received a 6-month restraining order. However, this period became her own time of healing. She sold her luxury beauty salon chain, donating part of the funds to hereditary birthmark research. The rest went toward establishing an art therapy clinic. "The deepest wounds are invisible," Helen said during counseling. "In pursuing perfection, I lost sight of what mattered most." At summer's end, Helen's clinic opening celebration was held. Though limited, it was the first authorized family gathering. George was invited, and his painting, Imperfect Beauty, became the clinic's symbol. "A new kind of family," Michael wrote in his journal that night. "Perhaps it doesn't start with a perfect blueprint, but with the courage to accept flaws and speak truth." Olivia's first birthday arrived in April as flowers began blooming. A different light filled the Wilson family garden. "The cake is ready," Laura's voice rang out in the afternoon sun. On the table sat a strawberry decoration cake using Olivia's right cheek birthmark as its motif, lovingly made by students from Helen's art therapy class. "Dad, the lighting's perfect," Michael called to George, who'd come from San Francisco, while setting up the camera tripod. The two had begun weekly online discussions about architecture and art, often evolving into consultations about Olivia's treatment. "I wonder if there's such a thing as a perfect moment," Helen approached hesitantly from the garden's edge. After 6 months of counseling, she was gradually regaining family time. Her luxury brand dresses had given way to softer linen clothing. "It doesn't need to be perfect," Laura gently placed her hand on her former mother-in-law's shoulder. "What matters is living this moment together." Olivia took her first steps, her birthmark glowing proudly on her right cheek. Under the young maple tree planted in the garden, she spread smiles. Laser treatments progressed carefully, gradually lightening the birthmark, but there was no need to rush the process. "Happy birthday, Olivia," all family members' voices joined together. The camera flash captured that moment without filters or editing, photographing the light just as it was. "This is our story's new chapter," Laura smiled quietly while holding her husband's hand. Like a young tree reaching toward the blue sky, this family was putting down strong roots in a new season.